I've had the Oppo Find N5 for a couple of weeks now, and as you may have seen in my full review, I think that this phone is absolutely phenomenal. It is probably overall the most impressive piece of hardware that I've ever used in terms of a phone form factor. Hell, maybe in terms of any hardware. It is just so incredibly thin and light. The screens are nice. The cameras are definitely good enough. And the software is very, very solid as well. It will be really easy to take all of that into account and to look at the fact that the OnePlus Open, kind of the device that was sort of a precursor to this, remains highly competitive against devices like the Galaxy Z Fold or the Pixel 9 Pro Fold. It'll be easy to take all of that and say, nothing that Samsung is going to do with the Galaxy Z Fold 7 is going to be able to really compete with the Oppo Find N5. But I think I disagree with that idea. In this video, I'm going to try to kind of outline exactly where I think and how I think the Z Fold 7 can compete with the Oppo Find N5. I know that some of you are not going to be nearly as bullish on the Fold 7 as I am, but nonetheless, it's a case I think I can make. So let's start off by talking about hardware. Obviously, like the biggest claim to fame for the Oppo Find N5 is just how obscenely thin and light this thing is. And when you pick up the Galaxy Z Fold 6 and you compare these two, just holding them in your hands, the difference is fairly large. The Z Fold just feels so much more like a brick in your hand now by comparison. When this thing came out, it wasn't that big of a deal. It felt okay, but now, like, look, you get used to using this with this size and this weight, this aspect ratio, cover display, that really, truly just feels like you're using a normal phone until you open it up, and then it feels even more insanely thin. This just doesn't really hold up all that well anymore. But there's good news on the horizon because we have these renders that are supposedly what the Galaxy Z Fold 7 is going to look like. And they are taking, I would say, several great big steps into the correct direction. This thing is allegedly going to be around 4.5 millimeters thick when open. So look, not thinner or as thin as the Oppo Find N5, which is 4.2-ish millimeters when open. But it's a lot closer. And I think that it's well within range. Okay, it's going to be thinner than the Pixel 9 Pro Fold. It's going to be a ton thinner than the Z Fold 6. So it's going to be, look at that. That's really quite good. And also look at that cover display, guys. It is a normal width, a normal aspect ratio compared to phones that you are used to using. So if they can bring the weight down just a little bit more, I think that what you will have here with the Galaxy Z Fold 7 is a device that when it's closed is going to feel remarkably similar to something like the Oppo Find N5. It is going to be pretty darn close to using a normal phone. And let's give Samsung their flowers, right? They've not done as much as they should have with their hardware in terms of slimming things down and making this cover display what most people seem to want it to be, more like a normal phone. But let's not pretend like their hardware isn't top notch. It absolutely is. These phones feel incredibly well built, and that is going to be the case here as well. It's just going to be a lot thinner. It's going to have that wider aspect ratio cover display. It's going to have an 8-inch inner display as well, a larger cover display. It's going to be really close, guys. Most people aren't going to care about 0.3 of a millimeter. They're not going to be able to brag about it online about being the thinnest book style foldable. But for the average user, it's going to be close enough. And there might actually be a benefit to being a little bit larger. So one of my biggest problems with the Oppo Find N5 is that the speakers just don't sound that great, right? You're such a thin device, there's just not really room for very good speakers. The Z Fold 6 has better speakers. And by not going all the way to 4.2 millimeters, I would expect it's going to maintain a small lead in the speaker department as well. And let's be honest, Samsung's not likely to adopt the new silicon carbon batteries with the Z Fold 7, so they're probably going to need a little bit more space to make sure they're packing in a larger battery in that device as well. And look, charging, absolutely going to be a win for Oppo. Capacity, absolutely going to be a win for Oppo. But actual real-world use battery life, I don't think it's going to be that big of a difference. In my experience, the Oppo Find N5 does last longer than my Z Fold 6, but it's not something that we're talking about like, multiple hours of screen on time. It's like maybe an hour, hour and a half. It's already pretty close. And when we talk about the screens themselves, the Z Fold 6 already has the crown in some ways, like brightness. This Z Fold 6 out in broad daylight, the cover display and the internal display both look brighter than the Oppo Find N5, and we are hearing some reports of Samsung reworking the hinge mechanism for the Galaxy Z Fold 7, reworking their ultra-thin glass materials. It's maybe potentially a newer version of ultra-thin glass. We saw Samsung Display demoing sort of a new look for their crease. You can see sort of what the old crease looks like on the left and the new one on the right. Look how visible that is on the left. Look how hard that is to see on the right. If they're able to actually deliver that or something even close to that with the Z Fold 7 and maintain their lead when it comes to brightness, the screens could be an easy win for Samsung. And oh, by the way, if you like the screens on the Oppo Find N5, which I do, they were made by Samsung. So it doesn't really, or shouldn't really shock anyone that Samsung might have the lead here. Everyone's using their displays already. When it comes to the cameras, we're also hearing rumors that seem pretty firm now that the Galaxy Z Fold 7 is finally going to be adopting the 200 megapixel sensor from the Ultra series phones. That should represent a pretty decent improvement to the camera performance. And as far as I'm concerned, the Oppo Find N5, not a terrible camera system, but I don't even think it was as good or is as good as the OnePlus Opens camera. It's not some camera champion. I think that the Fold 7 is going to be able to compete with it quite well. And the processing, I'm probably going to prefer. The Oppo device has a processing look that is indicative of a lot of Chinese manufacturers. It's very, 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 very bright. It's very, very sharp. It's a stylized look. I've talked about it ad nauseum. If you want to see more about that, you can watch some of my other camera videos on the Oppo Find N5. Samsung's processing, I think, is going to end up being preferable to a lot of users in North America. All they really do these days is boost the saturation just a little bit. They kind of do what a lot of people do to their photos at the end of the day anyways, automatically. So primary camera, I think they might have an advantage. Telephoto, yeah, Oppo's going to win that hand over fist, no question there. Ultra wide, well, it's pretty bad on the Oppo device. I think Samsung probably has to win that, and I would probably also give video to the Samsung device as well, just based on what I've seen, given that the Fold 6 probably already has better video than the Find N5. But then you've got to stop and think about the software. And I think this is actually a really interesting one, because if you start something that I think is really important for these tablet devices, these foldables, multitasking, I think I have to give it to the Oppo Find N5. Boundless view, pretty sure that's what it's called on Oppo devices, is absolutely excellent. If you want to see a breakdown of all the multitasking stuff, the Pixel, the Z Fold, and the Oppo phone, there's a video probably in the description down below showing that comparison. It's very, very good. But in most every other way, I think I probably do slightly, at least, prefer what Samsung is doing. One UI 7 is really, really quite good. I like the way that it looks. I like the new notification shade. I like the fact that I can now have big folders on my own screen. I'm a sucker for big folders. I'm not saying that ColorOS is bad, but One UI just feels very, very polished. It's running very smoothly these days. And again, I think that I at least slightly prefer it in pretty much every other way. And it's not like the multitasking stuff on the Z Fold is bad, right? It's not bad. I just happen to at least a little bit prefer what Oppo is doing with ColorOS. But then, not to be ignored, you have Samsung's greatest advantage, and that is the ease of purchase. You don't have to import this device. You can buy it directly through Samsung. You can buy it through your carrier. You can finance it. There's all these different things. There's probably a much easier way to do trade-ins as well, and that stuff is going to be such a massive advantage. What I would tell you is Samsung doesn't have to beat Oppo at every single category. All they have to do is be right there with Oppo in some important categories, which I think that they definitely will be. They have to answer the bell with regard to a few of the things that people have been begging for a long time, like a thinner device with a wider cover display with a better primary camera, which it seems as though they are doing. And their advantages in brand recognition in the United States and their distribution advantages in certain regions as well should take over from there. Now, I know a lot of you are probably just going to say that I'm a Samsung knight, I'm being biased or something like that, but I think that anyone that's been watching this channel for a long time, or at least a decent amount of time, probably knows I'm much more of a Pixel guy than I am a Samsung guy. I've enjoyed the Z Fold devices, but there have been some problems with them, things that I just haven't really liked. I would like to see a better camera. I'd like to see that wider cover display. It needs to get thinner. Hey, guess what? They're fixing all of those things with the Fold 7, and that is why I just actually think the Fold 7 might mark a really major change for the Z Fold series of devices. I honestly just think it's a phone you shouldn't be ignoring. Don't just look at the Oppo Find N5 and say, that's the end all be all, because I really, really think that the Fold 7 is going to be quite compelling, and it's probably going to be a lot easier for you to purchase if you're watching this video. Guys, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Subscribe for more content like this, and until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.